I never thought a single piece of paper could tear my world apart. But that's exactly what happened the day I found the lottery ticket. My name is Ellie Harper, and I'm 32. A nurse who spent her life stitching up other people's wounds while ignoring the ones festering in my own family. My husband, Tom, and I had been married for 8 years, living in a modest split level in suburban Ohio with our 2 kids, Lily and Max. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours until that $2. $3 million jackpot changed everything. The ticket was mine, or so I thought. I'd bought it on a whim at the gas station. A $3 impulse purchase after a grueling 12-hour shift. I tucked it into my purse, forgot about it, and went on with my life. That is, until the numbers were announced, and I realized I'd won. The memory of that moment is vivid. I was in the kitchen, chopping carrots for dinner, the radio humming in the background. The announcer read the numbers, and my knife froze mid-slice. I fumbled for the ticket, my hands trembling as I matched each digit. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't tell Tom right away. I wanted to savor it, to dream about what we could dopey off the mortgage, send the kids to college, maybe even take that trip to Italy we'd always talked about. But I made the mistake of telling my mother-in-law, Diane. First. Diane, with her perfectly styled silver hair and her knack for making me feel like I'd never be good enough for her son. She was over for dinner that night, and in a moment of naive excitement, I blurted it out. Her eyes lit up, but not with the warmth of shared joy. It was something sharper, hungrier. Diane didn't waste time. By the next morning, she'd called Tom, spinning a story about how I'd promised to share the winnings with the family. She suggested we all sit down to discuss it, as if the money was a communal pot. I was stunned. I hadn't promised anything. But Tom, ever the peacemaker, agreed to the meeting. That's when things started to unravel. Diane arrived with a plan. Her voice syrupy sweet as she proposed we use our windfall to fund her dream vacation of $14,000 luxury cruise through the Mediterranean. She'd already picked out the itinerary, waving glossy brochures like they were a done deal. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but Tom nodded along, his eyes avoiding mine. When I protested, Diane's smile tightened, and she said, Ellie, dear, it's only fair. I've done so much for this family. Her words stung, a reminder of every subtle dig she'd ever made about my cooking, my job, my parenting. I tried to stay calm, to reason with Tom later that night. I reminded him that the ticket was mine, bought with my own money, my own luck. But he was already swayed, talking about how his mom had struggled since his dad died, how she deserved something nice. I felt like I was screaming into a void. The next day, Diane showed up with a new demand, a share of the winnings for her future security. She'd even brought a financial advisor, some slick guy in a suit who threw around terms like trust funds and equitable distribution. I was livid. This wasn't about fairness. It was about control. Diane wanted to rewrite the narrative of our family, with her at the center, holding the purse strings. That's when I found the note. It was tucked inside an envelope in Tom's desk, written in Diane's elegant script, "Keep Ellie in line. The money's ours." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just greed. It was a betrayal, a calculated move to undermine me. I confronted Tom, waving the note in his face. But he stammered, claiming it was a misunderstanding. I didn't believe him. The trust we'd built over years was cracking. and I could feel the fault lines spreading. I started to wonder what else Diane had whispered in his ear. What other plans she'd made behind my back. The lottery ticket, that flimsy piece of paper, had become a weapon, and I was losing the war. I couldn't let it go. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Diane had always treated me like an outsider. But this was different. This was theft. Not just of money, but of my agency. My place in my own family. I started digging, looking for anything to turn the tables. I remembered the stories Diane used to tell about her investments. How she bragged about outsmarting people in business deals. I wondered if there was more to her past than she let on. I spent nights scouring public records. Old newspaper articles. Anything I could find. What I uncovered was a thread. A hint of something shoddy, a real estate deal from 20 years ago that left a family penniless. Diane's name was tied to it, buried under layers of shell companies. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to plant a seed. I decided to play her game. I invited Diane over, pretending to cave on the cruise idea. I poured her wine, smiled, and asked about her old business ventures, dropping just enough to let her know I'd been digging. Her face paled, just for a moment, before she recovered with a laugh. But I saw a crack in her armor. That night, I told Tom I was done compromising. If he wanted to side with his mother, he could, but I wasn't going to let her steal my future. He looked at me like I was a stranger, but I didn't care. I was fighting for my kids, for myself, for the life I'd earned. The lottery ticket was still in my purse, but it felt heavier now, like a grenade waiting to go off. The days that followed were a blur of tension and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the image of Diane's smirk, the way she'd wave that cruise itinerary like a trophy. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what it represented, her belief that she could bend our family to her will. Tom was distant, caught between his loyalty to me and his mother's relentless pressure. I tried to talk to him, to make him see how Diane was manipulating him. But he'd shut down, muttering about keeping the peace. I felt like I was losing him, piece by piece, to her calculated charm. I started to notice things I'd overlooked before, how Diane would call Tom late at night, her voice low and urgent through the phone. How he'd hang up looking guilty, avoiding my questions. I wondered what she was filling his head with, what promises or threats she was making. The note I'd found kept haunting me. Keep Ellie in line. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was an order. I began to see Diane not as the overbearing mother-in-law I'd tolerated for years, but as something more dangerous, a predator circling my family. I decided to take control. I called a lawyer, a friend from nursing school who specialized in estate planning. Her name was Sarah, and she had a no-nonsense way of cutting through chaos. Over coffee, I laid it all out: the ticket, the winnings, Diane's demands, the note. Sarah listened, her brow furrowing as I described Diane's push for the cruise and her vague talk of family shares. When I mentioned the real estate deal I'd found, Sarah's eyes sharpened. That's a lead, she said. If there's anything sketchy in her past, it could give you leverage. She advised me to secure the ticket, to treat it like evidence. I went home and hid it in a lockbox under the floorboards in our bedroom, a place even Tom wouldn't think to look. But hiding the ticket didn't ease the knot in my chest. I started watching Diane more closely, noting every word, every glance. She'd come over unannounced, always with a gift for the kids, a toy for Lily, a book for Max, as if she could buy their loyalty too. The kids adored her, and that made it worse. Lily would run to her, giggling, while Max showed off his latest drawings. I hated how she could charm them so effortlessly, how she could play the doting grandmother while plotting against me. I started to feel like a villain in my own home, resenting my children's love for her. One night, I overheard Diane talking to Tom in the living room while I was putting the kids to bed. Her voice was low, insistent. "You need to think about the future, Tom. Your father would have wanted me taken care of." I froze, my hand on Lily's bedroom door. The mention of Tom's father, who died 5 years ago, felt like a weapon. Diane knew how much Tom idolized his dad, how his memory was a soft spot she could exploit. I wanted to storm in, to scream at her to stop, but I held back. I needed to be smarter than that. Instead, I doubled down on my research. I spent hours online, digging deeper into the real estate deal. I found a blog post from a local historian, detailing a scandal in the early 2000s involving a company called Horizon Properties. Diane's maiden name, Carter, appeared in the comments, linked to a partner who'd vanished after the deal collapsed. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make me wonder what else she was hiding. I started cross-referencing names, dates, anything that could tie her to something concrete. The more I dug, the more I felt like I was peeling back layers of a carefully crafted facade. I confronted Tom again, this time with the blog post in hand. I didn't show him the screen, just read him the key details, watching his face for a reaction. He looked uncomfortable, but not surprised. "Mom's always been private about her past," he said, as if that explained everything. I pressed him, asking why he was so quick to defend her, why he couldn't see what she was doing to us. He snapped, saying I was obsessed, that I was turning a blessing into a curse. His words cut deep, but they also lit a fire in me. If he wouldn't fight for us, I would. I started to plan my next move. I called Sarah again, and she suggested a meeting with a private investigator, someone who could dig into Diane's financial history without raising red flags. I hesitated. Hiring a PI felt like crossing a line, but the thought of Diane walking away with my family's future pushed me forward. I met the investigator, a gruff man named Mike, in a diner across town. He listened to my story, jotting notes on a napkin. "People like her don't change," he said. "They just get better at hiding." He agreed to look into Horizon Properties and any other deals tied to Diane's name, promising discretion. That night, I dreamed of the lottery ticket, glowing like a beacon in my purse. In the dream, Diane reached for it, her fingers turning to claws. I woke up gasping, my heart racing. I checked the lockbox, just to be sure. The ticket was still there, but so was the fear that I was running out of time. Diane was moving faster now, her visits more frequent, her demands bolder. She'd started talking about moving closer, maybe even into our guest room, to be near the kids. The thought made my skin crawl. I knew I had to act, to find something that would stop her before she took everything. The waiting was the worst part. Every day felt like a countdown. The lockbox under the floorboards a constant reminder of what was at stake. Mike, the private investigator, called with updates, but they were slow, frustratingly vague. He'd found more on Horizon Properties, a trail of complaints, a lawsuit that was settled out of court, but nothing directly implicating Diane. Still, he was optimistic, saying he was close to a breakthrough. I clung to that hope, but it was hard to stay patient when Diane was tightening her grip on my family. Tom was slipping further away. He'd started spending more time with his mother, driving her to appointments, helping with her errands. He said it was because she was lonely, but I saw the way she leaned into him, her hand on his arm, her voice soft and coaxing. It was like watching a spider spin a web. I tried to talk to him, to remind him of the life we'd built together, but he brushed me off, saying I was overreacting. The kids noticed the tension too. Lily asked why Daddy was always gone, her big eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have. Max drew a picture of our family, but Diane was in the center, her smile too big, too sharp. I started to feel like I was living in a house of cards, one wrong move away from collapse. I couldn't trust Tom. Not fully. Not with Diane whispering in his ear. I started keeping my phone locked, my conversations with Sarah and Mike private. I hated the secrecy, but I had no choice. Diane was too good at playing the victim, turning every confrontation into a performance of hurt feelings. I'd seen her do it before at family gatherings, when she'd twist my words to make me look petty or cruel. Now, with $2, $3 million on the line, her act was sharper, more dangerous. One afternoon, while Diane was over, I caught her in my bedroom. She said she was looking for a scarf she'd lent me, but her eyes were scanning the room, lingering on the floorboards. My heart stopped. Did she know about the lockbox? I played it cool, offering to help her look, but my hands were shaking. After she left, I checked the lockbox again. The ticket was still there, but the encounter left me rattled. I moved the lockbox to a new spot, behind a loose panel in the garage, and started sleeping with my keys under my pillow. Mike called the next day with something solid. He'd found a former business partner of Diane's, a man named Richard Tate, who'd been part of the Horizon deal. Richard was willing to talk, but only in person, and only if I could guarantee anonymity. Mike arranged a meeting at a coffee shop 2 towns over. I told Tom I was visiting a sick friend, hating the lie but knowing he'd tell Diane if I didn't. The coffee shop was quiet, the kind of place where nobody looks twice at you. Richard was older than I'd expected, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. He told me Diane had been the mastermind behind Horizon, charming investors while he took the fall when things went south. She's ruthless, he said, his voice low. She'll do anything to win. Richard's story gave me what I needed: a name, a date, a paper trail. He handed me a folder with copies of old contracts, emails, even a deposition he'd given during the lawsuit. It wasn't enough to take to court, but it was enough to scare Diane. I thanked him, my mind racing. For the first time, I felt like I had a weapon of my own. I drove home, the folder hidden under the passenger seat, my hands gripping the wheel. I was ready to confront Diane, to lay out what I knew and demand she back off. But I needed to be careful. She was too smart, too slippery. When I got home, Tom was waiting. He looked angry, his arms crossed. "Where were you really?" he asked. I froze, caught off guard. Diane must have called him, planting doubts. I stuck to my story, but he wasn't buying it. "Mom says you're hiding something," he said. "She says you're not yourself." I wanted to scream, to tell him his mother was the one hiding things. But I held back. I needed to keep him on my side, at least until I could deal with Diane. I softened my voice, told him I was stressed about the money, that I just needed time. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. That night, I sat down with the folder, reading through every page. The more I read, the clearer it became. Diane wasn't just greedy. She was a con artist, a woman who'd built her life on taking what wasn't hers. I started to see her not as my mother-in-law, but as an enemy. The thought scared me, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't just fighting for the money anymore. I was fighting for my family, for the truth. I called Sarah, updating her on Richard's story. She told me to hold off on confronting Diane until Mike could verify the documents. You need to be airtight, she said. She'll twist anything you throw at her. I agreed, but waiting was torture. Diane was relentless, dropping by with more demands: a new car, a down payment on a condo. Each request was a test, a way to see how far she could push me. I smiled through it, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law. But inside, I was burning. I started to imagine what it would feel like to expose her, to watch her facade crumble. The thought was intoxicating, but it scared me too. Revenge was a dangerous path, and I wasn't sure I could walk it without losing myself. The folder from Richard became my lifeline, a tangible piece of evidence that kept me grounded as Diane's influence grew. I hid it in the garage with the lottery ticket, checking both daily to make sure they were safe. Tom's suspicion was palpable now. He'd watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. I hated the distance between us, the way our once easy conversations had turned into minefields. But I couldn't back down. Diane was a storm, and I was the only one holding up the umbrella. Mike called with confirmation. The documents were real. The emails, the contracts, the deposition, all of it pointed to Diane's role in the Horizon scandal. She'd manipulated investors, falsified records, and left Richard to face the fallout. Mike had even tracked down a second witness, a former secretary who'd seen Diane shred documents before the lawsuit. It was enough to build a case, or at least to make Diane sweat. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by fear. Confronting her would mean tearing open our family, exposing wounds that might never heal. I decided to test the waters. I invited Diane over for coffee, keeping my tone light, as if nothing was wrong. She arrived in a tailored coat, her smile as polished as ever. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd first told her about the lottery. I let her talk, nodding as she rambled about her cruise plans, dropping hints about a family trust she wanted to set up. Then I mentioned Horizon, casually, like it was something I'd stumbled across online. Her cup froze halfway to her lips, her eyes narrowing just enough to betray her. That was a lifetime ago, she said, her voice tight. Just business. Ellie, you wouldn't understand. I pressed further, mentioning Richard's name. Her face went white, her fingers tightening around the cup. You've been busy, she said, forcing a laugh. Digging into things that don't concern you. I smiled back, matching her tone. But inside, my heart was racing. I'd rattled her, and it felt good. Too good. I pulled back, changing the subject. But the seed was planted. She knew I knew something, and that knowledge was power. That night, Tom came home late, his face stormy. What did you say to Mom? He demanded. I played dumb, but he wasn't having it. She's upset. Ellie. She says you're accusing her of things, stirring up trouble. I wanted to tell him everything, to show him the folder, but I couldn't. Not yet. He was too deep in Diane's web, too quick to defend her. Instead, I apologized, saying I'd been curious, that I didn't mean to upset her. He didn't believe me, but he dropped it, retreating to the couch with a beer. The kids were my anchor through it all. Lily's laughter, Max's endless questions, they reminded me why I was fighting. I started spending more time with them, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, trying to shield them from the tension. But they weren't blind. One night, Max asked if Grandma Diane was mad at me. I hugged him, saying everything was fine. But the lie tasted bitter. I couldn't protect them forever, not if Diane kept pushing. Mike's next call was a game changer. He'd found a third witness, a lawyer who'd worked on the Horizon settlement. The lawyer, now retired, was willing to testify about Diane's role in exchange for immunity from any lingering liability. Mike was putting together a report, something I could take to the authorities if needed. But he warned me, this is big. Ellie, if you go public, it'll destroy her. And it might destroy your family too. His words hit hard. I'd wanted justice. But at what cost? I thought of Lily and Max, of Tom's face when he learned the truth about his mother. Could I do that to them? I spent days wrestling with the question. Part of me wanted to confront Diane head-on, to wave the report in her face and watch her crumble. But another part, the part that still loved Tom, that still believed in our family, hesitated. I started to wonder if there was another way, a path that didn't end in total destruction. Maybe I could use what I knew to negotiate, to force Diane to back off without dragging everyone into the mud. The idea felt weak, like a compromise, but it also felt human. I called Sarah for advice. She was blunt. As always, you've got the upper hand, but you need to decide what you want, revenge or redemption. Her words stuck with me. Revenge was tempting, a fire that burned hot and bright. But redemption for me, for Tom, for our kids felt like something worth fighting for. I started to imagine a different kind of confrontation, one where I could expose Diane's lies without losing everything. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I invited Diane over again, this time with a plan. I set up the dining room, the same table where this all began, and placed the folder in front of me, hidden under a stack of magazines. When she arrived, I poured her wine, my hand steady. I was ready to play my hand, to see if I could outsmart her at her own game. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of everything we both knew but wouldn't say. It was the beginning of the end, and I was ready to face it. The dining room felt like a battlefield as Diane sat across from me, her smile a mask I was learning to see through. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, imagining how I'd lay out the evidence, how I'd watch her squirm. But now, with the folder hidden under the magazines, my resolve wavered. This wasn't just about Diane. It was about Tom, the kids, the life we'd built. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had to be smart, not just angry. I started with small talk, asking about her cruise plans, letting her think she was in control. She leaned into it, describing the ship's amenities, the ports of call, as if the money was already hers. I nodded, my fingers brushing the edge of the folder, my heart pounding. Then I shifted gears. I mentioned Horizon again, this time with more detail: Richard's name, the lawsuit, the shredded documents. Her smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the magazines. You've been talking to the wrong people, Ellie, she said, her voice low, almost a hiss. I didn't flinch. I pulled the folder out, opening it to reveal the emails, the contracts, the deposition. These say otherwise, I said, keeping my tone even. She stared at the papers, her face a mask of barely contained panic. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, and it felt like victory. But victory was fleeting. Diane recovered quickly, leaning back with a laugh. You think you can scare me with old paperwork? I've been through worse. Her confidence was infuriating, but I'd expected it. I told her I didn't want to go to the authorities, that I just wanted her to back off, to let me and Tom decide what to do with the money. She tilted her head, studying me like a chess opponent. And if I don't? She asked. I leaned forward, matching her gaze. Then everyone finds out who you really are. It was a bluff I wasn't sure I could go through with it, but it landed. She didn't speak, just sipped her wine, her silence louder than any argument. That night, Tom came home early, his face pale. Diane had called him, spinning a story about how I'd threatened her, how I was trying to tear the family apart. I was ready for it. I sat him down, showed him the folder, and told him everything. Richard, the lawsuit, the witnesses. He listened, his hands clenched, his eyes darting to the papers. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He finally asked, his voice breaking. I wanted to scream that I'd tried, that he hadn't listened. But I didn't. Instead, I told him I needed him to choose him and the kids, or his mother's lies. He didn't answer right away, and that hurt more than anything. He said he needed time, that he couldn't believe his mother was capable of what I was saying. I let him go, knowing I couldn't force him to see the truth. But I wasn't done with Diane. I called Mike, telling him to keep digging, to find anything else that could strengthen my case. He warned me again about the cost, not just financial, but emotional. I didn't care. I was in too deep. The lottery ticket, a weight I carried everywhere, a reminder of what I stood to lose. The next day, Diane showed up unannounced, her demeanor different, less confident, more desperate. She didn't sit, just stood in the doorway, clutching her purse. Let's make a deal, she said. Half the money, and I disappear. No cruise, no trust, just gone. I was stunned. It was the first time she'd shown her hand, admitted she was in it for herself. I wanted to agree, to end it there. But something stopped me. Half the money was still too much, and I didn't trust her to keep her word. I told her I'd think about it, buying time. After she left, I sat with the kids, trying to anchor myself in their world. Lily was coloring, Max building a tower with blocks. They were so innocent, so unaware of the storm brewing around them. I wondered what kind of mother I'd be if I let Diane walk away with half our future, or if I dragged her through the mud and tore our family apart. Sarah's words echoed in my head: revenge or redemption. I wanted both, but I was starting to see they couldn't coexist. Mike called with a final piece of the puzzle, a recorded conversation from the Horizon days, obtained from the retired lawyer. In it, Diane admitted to falsifying documents, her voice cold and calculated. It was the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. I listened to the recording, my hands shaking, the reality of her betrayal sinking in. This wasn't just about money. It was about a woman who'd spent her life manipulating everyone around her, including her own son. I knew what I had to do, but the weight of it was crushing. I wasn't just fighting Diane anymore. I was fighting for the soul of my family, and I wasn't sure I'd win. The recording changed everything. Diane's voice, so calm and deliberate as she admitted her crimes, was a blade that cut through any lingering doubts. I played it again and again, each word fueling my resolve. But it also broke something in Meth's last shred of hope that I could salvage this without hurting Tom and the kids. I knew confronting Diane with the recording would be the point of no return. I sat in the dark, the lockbox in my hands, the ticket inside it a symbol of everything I'd fought for and everything I could lose. I called Sarah, playing her the recording over the phone. She was silent for a long moment before saying, "This is it. Ellie. You've got her. But you need to think about what comes next." She was right. Exposing Diane would mean exposing Tom's mother, the woman he'd idolized his whole life. It would mean telling Lily and Max that their grandmother wasn't who they thought. I wasn't sure I could live with that. But I also wasn't sure I could live with letting her win. I decided to give Tom one last chance. I waited until the kids were asleep, then sat him down in the living room. I played the recording, watching his face as Diane's voice filled the room. He went still, his hands gripping the armrests, his eyes fixed on the floor. When it ended, he didn't speak. I waited, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes wet. How could she do this? He whispered. I didn't have an answer. Only the truth. She'd done it because she could. Because she'd always put herself first. Tom's pain was raw, but it was also a turning point. For the first time, he saw what I'd been fighting against. He didn't defend her, didn't make excuses. Instead, he asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to confront her, to give her a chance to back off before I took the recording to the authorities. He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was losing his mother, and I was the one holding the knife. We planned the confrontation together, a rare moment of unity. We'd invite Diane over, lay out the evidence, and give her an ultimatum: walk away from the money, or face the consequences. It felt like a gamble, but it was the only way to avoid a public war. The day of the meeting, I was a wreck, my stomach churning as I set the dining room table. The folder and the recording were ready, hidden in a drawer. The kids were at a friend's house, a small mercy. When Diane arrived, she was all smiles, but there was a wariness in her eyes, like she sensed the trap. I didn't waste time. I sat her down, Tom beside me, and started with the folder, walking her through the emails, the contracts, Richard's deposition. Her face hardened with each page, but she didn't interrupt. Then I played the recording. Her voice echoed through the room, each word a nail in her coffin. When it ended, she didn't speak, just stared at me, her eyes cold and calculating. "What do you want, Ellie?" she asked, her voice flat. I told her the deal: drop all claims to the money, leave our family alone, and I wouldn't go to the police. If she refused, I'd make sure everyone knew who she was. Tom stayed silent, his presence a quiet support. Diane laughed, a brittle sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think you've won," she said, "but you don't know what you're up against." She stood, grabbing her purse, and walked out without another word. Her exit left a void, a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. Tom and I sat there, the weight of what we'd done settling over us. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same side. But I knew it wasn't over. Diane wasn't the type to go quietly. I checked the lockbox that night. The ticket's still safe. But the fear lingered. She'd made it clear she wasn't done. And I had to be ready for whatever came next. Diane's silence was deafening. For days, there was no no calls, no visits, no demands. It should have felt like a victory. But it didn't. It felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. Tom was different too. Quieter. His eyes shadowed with the weight of his mother's betrayal. We tried to keep things normal for the kids, pasting on smiles during breakfast. But the tension was palpable. Lily asked if Grandma was coming over soon, and I dodged the question, my heart aching at the thought of her disappointment. I kept in touch with Mike, who was still monitoring Diane's movements. He reported that she'd been seen meeting with a lawyer, a high-priced one known for defending white-collar crimes. It wasn't surprising, but it was unsettling. She was gearing up for a fight, and I had to be ready. I started documenting every conversation, every threat, every piece of evidence. Sarah helped me organize it, creating a timeline that could hold up in court if it came to that. The process was exhausting, but it gave me purpose, a way to channel the anger and fear. One night, Tom broke down. We were in bed, the house quiet, when he started crying, his shoulders shaking. I should have seen it, he said, his voice raw. I should have protected you. I held him, my own tears falling, and told him it wasn't his fault. Diane had manipulated him his whole life, and seeing through that took courage. For the first time, I felt like we were a team again, united against a common enemy. But the guilt lingered for him, for me, for the family we were trying to save. Then Diane made her move. It wasn't a call or a visit, but a letter, delivered by courier. It was addressed to Tom, but I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside was a legal document, a claim to half the lottery winnings, citing familial contributions and emotional distress. It was absurd, but it was also a power play, a way to drag us into a public battle. Attached was a note in her handwriting. You can't erase me. Ellie. I'm family. The words burned. A reminder of her audacity, her refusal to let go. I showed Tom the letter, and his face hardened. She's not getting a dime, he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. We called Sarah, who reviewed the document and laughed. This won't hold up, she said. It's a scare tactic. But she advised us to respond formally, to show Diane we weren't backing down. We drafted a letter with Sarah's help, rejecting her claim and referencing the evidence we had. We didn't mention the recording, keeping that as our ace in the hole. Sending the letter felt like firing a shot across the bow. I knew Diane wouldn't take it lying down, and I was right. 2 days later, she showed up at the house, her face a mask of fury. She didn't knock, just walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood. You think you can threaten me? She spat, her eyes locked on me. Tom stepped between us, his voice calm but firm. Leave, Mom. This is over. She stared at him, her expression a mix of shock and betrayal, then turned and left without a word. The confrontation left us shaken, but it also clarified things. Tom was with me, fully, for the first time since this began. We sat down with the kids that night, explaining that Grandma might not be around as much, that we were working through some grown-up problems. Lily cried, and Max asked questions we couldn't fully answer. But we held them close, promising we'd always be there. It was a promise I meant with every fiber of my being. Mike called the next day with a warning. Diane had been asking around about me, digging into my past, my job, anything she could use. It was a desperate move, but it showed she was running out of options. I felt a strange mix of fear and pity. Diane was fighting for her life, her identity, but so was I. The difference was, I was fighting for something real, me, family, my future. I told Mike to keep watching her, to let me know if she crossed any lines. The war wasn't over, but I was ready for the next battle. The standoff with Diane stretched into weeks, each day a test of my endurance. The house felt like a fortress, the lockbox my most guarded treasure. Tom and I were closer now, bound by our shared resolve. But the strain was taking its toll. We argued over small things, dishes, bills. The kids' schedules, our nerves frayed by the constant threat of Diane's next move. I kept the folder and the recording close, checking them obsessively, as if they might vanish. Mike's updates were sporadic but alarming. Diane had hired a private investigator of her own, someone to dig into my life. I wasn't worried about what she'd find. I'd lived honestly. Maybe too honestly, but the invasion of privacy stung. I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked down the street, their drivers watching the house. I told Tom, and he confronted his mother over the phone, his voice shaking with anger. She denied it, of course, but the call stopped after that. It was a small win, but it felt hollow. The kids were struggling too. Lily became clingy, asking for grandma every night. Max drew darker pictures, his once bright colors replaced with grays and blacks. I took them to a therapist, a kind woman who helped them process the changes. She told me kids are resilient, but they need stability, honesty. I tried to give them that, but it was hard when I was barely holding myself together. I started to question whether I'd made the right choice, whether exposing Diane was worth the pain it was causing. Then came the bombshell. Mike called late one night, his voice urgent. He'd found a new witness, someone who'd worked with Diane on another deal, Post Horizon. This one involved a charity she'd run, a front for siphoning donations. The witness, a woman named Karen, had records, bank statements, emails, even photos of Diane at fundraisers, smiling while she pocketed the money. It was damning, enough to not just scare Diane, but to bury her. Mike emailed me the files, and I spent hours poring over them, my stomach churning at the depth of her deceit. I showed Tom the new evidence, and he sat in silence, his face pale. "She's my mother," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, knowing how much that truth hurt. But I also knew we couldn't stop now. Diane wasn't just a threat to me. She was a threat to everyone she touched. We decided to meet with Sarah and Mike to plan our final move. The meeting was tense, the air thick with the weight of what we were about to do. Sarah suggested going to the authorities, letting them handle Diane's past crimes. Mike agreed, but warned it would be messy, public, painful. I hesitated. The idea of turning Diane over to the police felt final, irreversible. I thought of Lily and Max, of the headlines they'd read, the whispers at school. But I also thought of the families she'd hurt, the lives she'd upended. Justice wasn't just about me. It was about all of them. Tom reached for my hand, his grip tight. "We do this together," he said. I nodded, tears in my eyes. We were in it now. No turning back. We prepared a package for the authorities, the folder, the recording, Karen's files. Sarah helped us draft a letter, outlining Diane's crimes without mentioning the lottery. We wanted to keep that separate, to protect our family's future. The day we sent it, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. It was done, but it wasn't over. Diane would fight, and she'd fight dirty. I checked the lockbox again. The ticket's still there. A reminder of why I'd started this. That night, I dreamed of Diane, her face twisted with rage, her hands reaching for the ticket. I woke up screaming, Tom shaking me awake. He held me, whispering that it was okay, that we'd get through this. But I wasn't so sure. Diane was a force, a storm that wouldn't stop until it destroyed everything in its path. I clung to Tom, to the kids, to the hope that we could come out of this hole. But deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. The authorities moved faster than I expected. 2 days after we sent the package, a detective called, asking for a meeting. His name was Carter, a gruff man with kind eyes who listened as I recounted everything Diane's demands. The Horizon scandal, the charity fraud. Tom sat beside me, silent but steady, his presence a lifeline. Carter took the folder, the recording, and Karen's files, promising to investigate. He warned us that Diane would likely be questioned soon, that things could get ugly. I nodded, already bracing for the fallout. Diane didn't wait for the police to come to her. She showed up at our house the next morning, her face a mask of fury. "You think you can ruin me?" she screamed, banging on the door. Tom opened it, his body blocking her path. "You did this to yourself," he said, his voice cold. She tried to push past him, but he held firm, telling her to leave or he'd call the police. She laughed, a harsh, desperate sound, and said, "You'll regret this. Both of you." Then she was gone, her car peeling out of the driveway. The kids were at school, thank God, but the encounter left me shaken. I called Carter, telling him what happened. He said they'd bring Diane in for questioning that afternoon, that they had enough to hold her. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. Tom and I spent the day trying to act normal, picking up the kids, making dinner, but the air was heavy with unspoken fears. That evening, Carter called again. Diane had been questioned, but she'd lawyered up, refusing to talk. They'd found more evidence, though bank records tying her to the charity fraud, witnesses willing to testify. It was enough for an arrest. But Carter warned us she might make bail. The thought of her out there, free to come after us, made my skin crawl. I checked the lockbox again. The ticket's still safe, but it felt like a curse now, a magnet for all this pain. Tom and I talked late into the night, trying to figure out what came next. We agreed to use some of the money to move, to start fresh somewhere Diane couldn't reach us. It was a hard decision, leaving the home we'd built, but it felt necessary. We started looking at houses online, dreaming of a new beginning. The kids were excited about the idea, talking about new rooms, new schools. It gave me hope, a glimpse of a future beyond this nightmare. But Diane wasn't done. A week later, a letter arrived, this time from her lawyer. It was a cease and desist, accusing us of defamation, threatening a lawsuit if we didn't retract our false claims. It was a desperate move, but it showed she was still fighting. Sarah laughed when I showed her the letter, saying it was a bluff, that Diane's own evidence would bury her. But it still rattled me. The idea that she could drag this out, keep us in limbo. Then came the call from Carter. Diane had been arrested, charged with fraud and embezzlement. She'd made bail, but there was a restraining order in place, keeping her away from us. It was a small victory, but it didn't feel like enough. I knew Diane wouldn't stop, not until she was behind bars for good. I started to think about redemption again, about what it would mean to move forward, to heal. I wanted to believe we could, but the scars were deep, and I wasn't sure they'd ever fade. The weeks after Diane's arrest were a strange mix of relief and unease. The restraining order kept her at a distance, but her presence lingered, a shadow over every decision. Tom and I moved forward with our plans, finding a house in a quiet town an hour away. It was smaller than our current home, but it had a big yard for the kids, a fresh start we all needed. We used a portion of the lottery money to secure it, keeping the rest in a trust for Lily and Max's future. The ticket, once a symbol of hope, then a weapon, was finally just money we'd earned through blood and tears. Diane's case moved slowly, the legal system grinding through evidence and motions. Carter kept us updated, saying the prosecution was strong, that Diane's chances of walking free were slim. But she was still out there, on bail, and every creak of the house at night made me jump. I started therapy, not just for me, but for the kids, helping us process the betrayal, the fear. Tom went too, working through his guilt, his anger, his love for a mother who'd never been what she seemed. One day, a package arrived, no return address. Inside was a letter from Diane, written in her elegant script. "I'm sorry," it began, and I almost laughed at the audacity. But as I read on, I saw something else, not remorse. Exactly, but a kind of resignation. She admitted to some of her wrongs, not all, and asked for forgiveness, for a chance to see the kids again. I showed Tom, and we sat with it, torn. Part of me wanted to burn the letter, to erase her from our lives. But another part, the part that still believed in redemption, wondered if there was a way to move forward without hate. We didn't respond. Not right away. We talked to the therapist, to Sarah, to Carter. They all said the same thing. Diane's apology was a tactic, a way to worm back into our lives. But I couldn't shake the image of her alone, stripped of her charm, her power. I didn't forgive her. It wasn't sure I ever could, but I started to see her as human, flawed and broken like the rest of us. It didn't change what she'd done, but it changed how I carried it. The trial came 6 months later. Diane took a plea deal, avoiding a public spectacle but not prison. She was sentenced to 5 years, with a chance for parole in 3. The courtroom was quiet. Just us, Carter, and a few reporters. Diane didn't look at us as she was led away. Her head bowed. Tom cried, and I held his hand, knowing this was the end of something and the beginning of something else. We moved into the new house a month later. The kids ran through the yard, laughing, their joy a balm for the wounds we'd carried. Tom and I started rebuilding, not just our home, but our trust, our love. The lottery money was a gift, but the real lesson was in what it had cost us, what we'd learned about loyalty, about justice, about ourselves. I kept the ticket, not in a lockbox, but in a frame, a reminder of the $2. 3 million lesson we'd never forget. We were a family, scarred but stronger, and we'd face whatever came next together.